Right, good morning everybody. The doors are closed, it's 9:30 on the dot, so we better get started. A very, very warm welcome to all of you who are joining the session, which is Building a Wellbeing Economy from the Ground Up at the SCVO Gathering 2023. Very quickly, if you're here in error, you've made a beautiful mistake. The doors are locked, and we hope you enjoy the session as well. Before introducing myself, I'll introduce my colleague from British Sign Language, who will be with us for the whole event as well. My name is Jonathan Christie. I'm the Chief Executive of the Cabrick Trust, based up in very rural North East Scotland. Prior to that, I was Deputy UK Director at the Wood Foundation, and I'm currently Trustee for SCVO as well. And I'll be your chair for this session. So thank you in advance for your patience and for your tolerance. Now, with the concept of wellbeing economy gaining ever-increasing attention and support within Scotland, with the Scottish Government recently appointing a Cabinet Secretary for Wellbeing Economy, we have set up this session to achieve two principal aims. Firstly, we want to introduce the vision for a wellbeing economy in Scotland from WEAll Scotland, and we'll be shortly hearing from Lucas. Secondly, we want to facilitate a conversation in the room to further develop a vision and discuss the role the third sector can and should play in a transition to a wellbeing economy. There's an overarching question that we want all of you to be thinking about as we navigate through the next hour or so, and that is how can we fully play our role as a third sector in bringing about a wellbeing economy. And for any of those who were next door at the First Minister's breakfast session, it was wonderful to see wellbeing economy cited within that conversation. It was wonderful to hear many things cited within that conversation that give us great hope. But I think there's a challenge which I'd anticipate from conversations in the room about turning that incredibly positive rhetoric into tangible action. And I think if we can get into the nitty-gritty of that conversation, that would be time well spent. So, before getting involved with our introduction from WEAll Scotland, I have an incredible panel to introduce. I'll start with Dr. Lucas Bunce. Lucas has been Policy and Engagement Lead for the Wellbeing Alliance in Scotland for 2 years, based in beautiful Kinlochleven. Before his move into the third sector, he had several years of experience researching and promoting wellbeing economics. In his PhD, obtained at University of Leeds, he investigated how structural change can contribute to the creation of a sustainable post-growth economy. Next, I'm very delighted to introduce Helen Ray. Helen has been Head of Philanthropy and Quality at Foundation Scotland for 4 years, but has been with Foundation Scotland for about 21 years, working in various roles from managing the grant teams to supporting many donors with their philanthropy planning. Based in rural Aberdeenshire as well, like myself, Helen has a Master's in Grant-Making, Philanthropy and Social Investment from City University's London's Bayes Business School, and when not working, Helen is the leader of our local Scout group, a volunteer with our local Community Resilience Group, and Secretary of the Parent Council. And last, but by no means least, Dr. Judith Turbine. Judith became Chief Executive of Children in Scotland in August 2021. She has spent most of her professional life working in the charity sector. For much of that time, she has worked in international development with charities challenging poverty and inequality. She worked in Latin America and the Caribbean for many years in frontline organisations with multinational funders before moving to Dublin to work as CEO of Progressio Ireland. Judith returned to Scotland in 2013 as Head of Engagement with the Scottish Charity Regulator, where she has had the pleasure with working with many charities across Scotland, and I'm certain many in this room. She is currently the Deputy Chair of the Cora Foundation and on the board for the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. Judith has a PhD from the University of Bath, which looked at empowerment in development. Aside from her wonderful friends and family, the things that make her most happy are mountains, music, running, cricket, and a good book. So, we are with a steam company and very fortunate to have the three of you with us today. But I'm going to begin things by welcoming Lucas up to set the scene and to share more about WEAll Scotland's vision for a wellbeing economy in Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to all of you from me as well, and thank you for the introductions, Jonathan. So, as Jonathan said, I work for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland, or WEAll, as we like to call it, And the Wellbeing Economy Alliance really is a global collaboration and movement of organizations and people working together to build a well-being economy, which in a nutshell we like to talk about as one that delivers social justice on a healthy planet. And really the reason we're here today is because that has been a concept that has been getting increasing attention and momentum in Scotland. In terms of civil society, we've been working with our network over the past few years to put together a vision of what a wellbeing economy could look like in Scotland, and we sent an open letter to the First Minister in July this year, which got more than 200, or support from more than 200 organizations, academics, businesses, faith leaders, which shows kind of, I think, the interest there is in that concept in civil society. But it's not just in civil society, but it's also in the government, as we've heard this morning, has put the wellbeing economy kind of to the top of their agenda, and we have a lot of very positive rhetoric, as Jonathan said, but that might not necessarily be completely matched by action yet. I think there's quite a long way to go. So what I want to do in this session is to briefly outline what a wellbeing economy is, but I will keep that as brief as possible for those of you who might not have engaged with the concept before, because what I really want to do is to hear from my fellow panelists and from you how we can work together in the third sector to make it happen. So what is a wellbeing economy then? As I said, in a nutshell, we like to say it's an economy that delivers social justice on a healthy planet. But what really kind of brings together the movement, or where the idea comes from, is the shared understanding that the way we have designed our economy is one of the root causes for a lot of the environmental and social problems we are facing. And I think in this room, I probably don't have to say an awful lot about that. We've got the climate crisis, which is getting more and more urgent. We've got a wider environment and biodiversity crisis. We're losing lots of species all the time, and a whole raft of other environmental challenges we're facing. But then the economy is not delivering for people either. In Scotland, we still have 1 in 4 children growing up in poverty, and that's not because we haven't got enough, but our economy generates these incredible levels of inequality. And a lot of the time we're being told in some ways that really that is the best that the economy can do. And the way to solve the problem is essentially to keep the economy broadly as it is and just make it bigger, grow GDP, which is the way we measure our economy. And then that enables us to raise the taxes and create the wealth, which then we can use to fix some of the problem that growth creates in the first place. So that's kind of the story we are told, but it's not really working anymore, if it has ever worked, because the kind of model of the economy and the growth we are creating in the first place, especially in rich countries like here in Scotland, is now creating more problems than we can fix. And so the wellbeing economy really is about getting away from that, and it's about designing the economy so we create our priorities, a healthy planet, enough for everyone, in the first time round, and we kind of design that into the economy. So what is a wellbeing economy then? And it's not a blueprint, I think, or a list of policies for all of us to do, although obviously there are some policies that lend itself more than others, but it's really a different way of thinking about what our economy should be designed to do and how we go about achieving that. Like I said, a shared set of values and principles that we then can try and apply in different settings. And that's kind of, these kind of shared principles have got 2 parts. One is about what is a wellbeing economy, what are we trying to achieve, and the second one is how do we go about doing that. And I just realized I forgot a section. That is very bad. So basically what we decided to, with our movement, we've been working over the last few years to have settled on these 5 kind of wellbeing economy needs, which kind of set out the vision of what our economy really should be designed to deliver. And these are dignity, so that everybody has enough to live a good life. The second one is nature, so we have a safe and restored natural world. The third one is fairness, so income, wealth, and power are distributed fairly. The fourth one is purpose, so the idea that our institutions serve the common good and that the work that creates social and ecological well-being is rewarded. And the last one is participation, so the idea that everybody has a say in the decisions that affect them, whether that is in their communities, in their workplaces, or in their countries. And I would hope that these are things that resonate with most of you. But it is worth remembering that our economy is not designed to deliver these kind of outcomes at the moment. The next big question is then, how do we do that? And you might be disappointed to hear that WEAll hasn't got all the answers to that. I don't think any one organization has all the answers to that. But we do have these kind of 4 principles that we find useful to start thinking about how we can deliver that kind of well-being economy. And they all start with a P, which kind of makes it quite useful to remember them. And you can think about them as the corners of the jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to put together. And none of these are new. You would probably have heard about them before, and that is really reflecting that the well-being economy is not new. It's not about reinventing the wheel. A lot of the solutions we've already got, a lot of them we're already practicing, especially in the third sector. But it's about scaling them up, collaborating, and really creating the momentum behind this kind of new economic system. So for the rest of my presentation, I'm just briefly going to run through these 4 Ps and explain a little bit what they mean, but also then use them to reflect a little bit on what kind of question those raise for me about the role of the third sector and how we can step up our efforts to kind of make that economy happen. And so the first one is purpose. And that's really the idea that delivering good lives for all on a healthy planet becomes kind of the guiding principles across government, businesses, other organizations. So on a practical level, for a government, that might mean replacing GDP with a more meaningful measure of progress. And then also kind of aligning the budget with that, which is something that New Zealand has been trying in the last few years. But it's also thinking about what the point of businesses is. When it comes to the third sector, I think really I don't have to say too much about that, because that kind of purpose is really what gets us out of bed in the morning, is why we're sitting here, and what really unites the sector, I think. The purpose of making people's lives better, and improving the quality of our environment. And that really creates this incredibly diverse and passionate sector that reaches into all kinds of areas of people's lives. But I think the question that kind of came to me when I thought about it is whether we can be stronger, or should we be stronger in demanding that the rest of our economy serves the same purpose. Like, I feel like we're being told a lot of the time that the economy is the businesses over there and they make the money, and our job is to be here to pick up the pieces, which I don't think is good enough. And I think we actually have a lot to share with the other sectors of how to build an economy that is motivated by purpose, and especially in areas like the social enterprise sector. I think we're already doing a lot of really interesting work. The next one I will take together in the interest of time, so that's prevention and predistribution. And that's the idea, as I mentioned already, that our economy creates a lot of harm in the first place and a lot of inequality in the first place, which we then spend a lot of effort and money to address, whether that is building flood defenses because of climate change or treating the health impact of air pollution. And the idea behind these is really that we redesign the economy, so we have to do less of that work in the first place, less of that firefighting. And actually that kind of principle, when we bring that up, sometimes actually leads to some uncomfortable conversations, especially in the third sector, because for a lot of us, that firefighting work is what we do. It's what we get funding for, is our purpose. And so we've been asked, like, does a well-being economy mean the end of the third sector? Because we design all of that out of the system, and I would say absolutely not. I do think there would be quite a shift in what we do as a third sector, and a part of what we would do would probably become obsolete. But for me, that's not a bad thing, because we are spending so much energy and resources on just making sure people have the basics, on keeping people alive. And I just really like to imagine what we could do with that energy if we could focus it on actually doing the good stuff that makes people flourish, whether that is organizing a local football club, growing food together, organizing Kayleys. And these examples probably tell you more about me than about the world of the third sector, but you get the idea. So it's all that work that is really, makes people flourish, but that we can also never have enough of. And then the final one is people power. And that's the idea that a well-being economy cannot be designed from the top down, but that it really needs to be built on like meaningful participation. And that is partially because if we don't involve the people who are currently at the sharp end of the economic system and the quiet voices we often don't hear, if we don't involve them, we're going to get it wrong because we need to design the system that works for them. But the other reason is that it's also a lot of these questions that a well-being economy raises are actually very political. Like, what is the kind of thing that everybody has a right to have? What are the kind of things you can make a profit with, or maybe are not allowed to make a profit with? What does it mean to have a fair distribution of income and wealth? And that's not questions that can be answered by an economist like me, but that need to be really come from a meaningful democratic process. And I think, again, the third sector has a lot to offer in that regard. I know so many of you are doing amazing work in kind of making ensure that the quiet voices are heard in the places that are matters and doing that really participatory work. But I also know very much from our own experience at WEAll Scotland that is incredibly hard to do well. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of capacity that we don't always have. And that, means that I do think we probably can do better in that regard. So, and also, again, share the experience that we have there with other areas of the economy. So hopefully that has given you a little bit of an overview of what the wellbeing economy is, and maybe raise some questions. And I'm really looking forward now to hear from my fellow panelists and from you who actually have a lot more experience of working in the sector than me, and pick up that discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucas. And I hope you are all thinking about the questions that you have, which are going to be central to the conversation that we have next. To fuel those questions, we have two panelist reflections to present now, which are as much a reflection upon what Lucas has described as they are a provocation for the conversation that we want to have after them. So I'll first hand over to Judith to give her reflection, and then Helen afterwards.
Hi, good morning. It's a delight to be here and to be talking on this topic, although it's not a delight to be following the expert. That's always bad. So what I would say by way of starting is that obviously for children in Scotland, with a vision of a Scotland where all children have the chance to flourish, the well-being economy and looking at how we can begin to really construct that is absolutely essential. It has to be rights-based. It has to be an economy that is working for the people and not an economy that is working for itself with a little add-on, a bit of redistribution so it's working for the people. So sort of shifting that around is absolutely essential. And that participatory bit, which is something that's very dear to our heart, is very essential in that. And what I'm going to do, because we're just going to speak for a few moments to leave lots of time for questions, is just talk a little bit about the levels at which I think the third sector can contribute to this. And Lucas has already touched on that in quite in a good way. But actually, I wanted to start from the very individual level. So we talk a lot in the third sector about being, good at this stuff and being good at sort of looking at the wellbeing economy. And at the individual level, we need to be absolutely making sure that that is central to the way that we are living, the way we are modelling, and particularly if you're in leadership positions, and I would argue that leadership positions are across the whole organisation, that you are modelling what that means, and that you are modelling, once you're in a position like I am on a leadership team in a management position, as a CEO of an organisation, that you are modelling an organisation that's putting well-being at its core, not just a wee well-being plan that sits over there, but a well-being plan that sits at the centre of what you do. And sometimes as an organisation itself, that makes you have to have difficult decisions. If you're going to have a ratio of salaries from top to bottom, for instance, so that you can start working on that inequality piece, if you're going to start paying people properly, you might be able to pay less people. What does that mean for the work you can do? So how do you actually construct that well-being model within your own organisation and model it as an organisation? And then, of course, that has to be the golden thread that goes through our dealings with the communities we work with the children and young people we work with the other organisations we work with. Are we making sure that we're stitching that golden thread of well-being through all of that and through the way that we engage with other people at that level? And I think one of the very important things is we mustn't underestimate the cultural shift that this will take. we can talk about a wellbeing economy and being happy to sort of have less but have it distributed in a better way. But that means big decisions for a lot of people. And transferring resources to prevention means actually having less resource to spend on firefighting. So how do we get that cultural shift? And how do we talk to our people in our organisations, our collaborators, our partners to make sure that we can take that cultural shift and make that change? I think the other thing is that we need to be, I think we're pretty good in the third sector about trying to collaborate, but we know how difficult collaboration is. If we want to really build a wellbeing economy, we have to be looking for new, different, stronger collaborations. We cannot do this on our own. And sometimes that work that's involved in collaboration, I often, we talk to staff about, oh yeah, we're going to do this new piece of work, or we should be working with X, Y, Z. Oh, but it would be so much quicker if we just did it on our own. But we must get away from that way of thinking, investing the time in those relationships, investing the time in those collaborations. And also, while we need to begin to challenge, and that will be my last point, we do need to understand that across the whole piece there are allies in this journey, and we need to stop thinking about them and us. It's like, it's us and us. We are Scotland, we are part of Scotland, and we have to work out where we have these allies and how we can build these collaborations to make that real change. And yes, one of the key things we can do as a third sector is keep that messaging strong, keep that messaging clear, talk about wellbeing economy wherever we can, demonstrate how preventative action is so much more effective than dealing with the problems down the line. And keeping that strong messaging, challenging messaging, but wherever possible, the constructive messaging. This is where we are, this is where we want to get to, here are some of the ways we can get there. I'll stop there so that we've got plenty of time for questions, and I'll hand over.
Thank you. So I'm Helen Ray. I'm Head of Philanthropy at Foundation Scotland. And for those of you that don't know Foundation Scotland, we are Scotland's community foundation. A community foundation connects philanthropic people and organisations to local causes and charities. And our aim is to build thriving and resilient communities in Scotland. And last year we distributed around 23 million to just under 4,500 charities and community groups. So I'm trying to bring the perspective of a funder into the conversation today. So for the last 2 years, we've been grappling with how we can be more deliberate in applying a wellbeing economy lens to our work, and to consider how we as a funder can contribute to building a wellbeing economy in Scotland. We've been trying to focus on the principles needed to get to a wellbeing economy, particularly prevention and people power. So the third sector is already working really hard and tirelessly to build those thriving and resilient communities. And collectively, it has a profound impact on the lives of the people in communities, whether these communities are defined by geography or thematic interest. So by doing so, the third sector is inherently aligned with the principles of the wellbeing economy and already prioritises the wellbeing of individuals and the communities that it serves. And we know from the frequent crises that our communities face, such as the impact of climate change, as we've seen demonstrated in the recent flooding, things such as the recent global pandemic and our current cost of living crisis, that it's the sector that does the heavy lifting to meet these needs and to support communities in this time of crisis. And communities are really stepping up and are beginning to look beyond responding to the immediate need and starting to look at what the root causes are of the issues that we're facing. So as funders, we need to ensure that there are mechanisms and opportunities for organisations to begin to look at prevention and begin to look at what the root causes are in those communities. With support from WEAll Scotland, we've been delivering a series of staff training and workshops to help us understand the wellbeing economy and what is needed to achieve this. And we've developed an upstream mindset toolkit that can be used by our staff as well as by our applicants. And this helps applicants and staff see where organisations and charities fit in terms of being in an upstream spectrum. The spectrum splits prevention into 3 areas: upstream, which is before harm occurs; midstream, which is mitigating harm that has happened; and downstream, which is helping us to cope with the harm. So staff or applicants can use the tool to map where their organisation is on the spectrum to see where they are and how upstream their work is. Now, it's worth noting that delivering in one or the other isn't necessarily right, that there needs to be an approach that tackles all 3. We're always going to need to be looking at immediate need. There'll be a need for midstream work, but we do need to start looking more upstream to tackle root cause. And we're trying to develop a range of funding programmes that suit all types of work on the spectrum. And we recently launched our Tackling Inequalities Fund, which was the first fund of Foundation Scotland's own funding. And this was a 5-year unrestricted pot to help organisations tackle inequalities in their communities. We're trying to learn as a funder and recognise some of the challenges with upstream funding, particularly when working with our donors. How do you report on what a grant has prevented, particularly when the outcomes are not known for so far into the future? So like many funders, we're looking at how we can distribute our funding differently and how we can better meet the principles. And people power participation is a key area where we can improve. For some of our programmes, we are already asking those we support to engage with us and to ask them what they see as the needs and the solution and to help us inform grant programme design. And we do have those with direct experience helping us to make decisions on awards that we make. However, we recognise that communities know best what they need, and we can and should do more of this. We need to really try and encourage collaboration and partnership and not competition, having organisations fight for the same small pots of funding. We need to work harder to share the learning that we have from all the organisations that we've supported, supporting organisations to shout about their success, but also to talk about what hasn't learned and to use that collective learning to try and influence policy change. There is a shift in funders at the moment. Many are now beginning to move to provide unrestricted funding to allow organisations to deliver and design the services they need without the need to try and package it into project-based funding. And we need to work more to encourage more long-term investment. Longer-term funding allows organisations the breathing space to deliver, develop and innovate without having to worry about the continual need to apply for funding year on year. And long-term unrestricted funding will allow organisations more time to advocate for policy change and to amplify the voices of those that they support. We also need to be providing more support to the sector to consider environmental impacts and to understand how small changes can make a difference. And we are encouraging our applicants to consider sustainable alternatives to their projects and services. And in 2020, we proudly joined 59 other UK charitable foundations in pledging our support to the funder commitment on climate change. And over the past 3 years have been working to align our foundation's operations and commitments to ensure that we're leading by example and actively contributing to the global effort to climate change. We are still at the start of our learning journey on how we can be more focused on contributing to building a wellbeing economy, but we are committed to doing this and we're looking forward to developing this further in the future.
Wonderful. I'll finish very briefly by reiterating sincere thanks to the panel for their time, for their insight, for their expertise this morning. Thank you to colleagues from BSL for supporting this session, and thank you for listening, but for those incredible questions, which I think demonstrates the importance of the conversation we're amongst on wellbeing economy. Please enjoy the rest of the gathering. Thank you very much.
Oh, sack the chairman, sacked.